Oh, the glasses, my glasses have a glare. There. Okay. Ooh, I just got my hair done, so I'm trying to arrange it. So, okay. There we go. Greetings to anyone that is watching this video. Good morning, good evening, good night. My name is Olamide, and I wanted to weigh in on this video, The Woman King. I went to go see it. I don't know if many people have had the opportunity to see the movie. It is wonderful. It is amazing. And so many people have had opinions, feedback on this movie. I think the boycott myself kind of caught me, off guard. Definitely isn't the reaction that I didn't realize that the reaction towards the movie itself would be so severe. Even beforehand with the trailer, again, I didn't even know about the movie till it kind of came out. But at any rate, I wanted to give some feedback and weigh in. So many people have had opinions on this. There are a lot of opinion feedback videos on this movie. I want to make sure that my voice is heard, particularly as it relates to an African American's point of view, a practitioner of African spirituality, and someone who has an understanding and respect and connection to it, a descendant of slaves, ADOS, found, some people say foundational Black American. But I would call myself and classify myself as all of that. And so, with that being said, off rip, I'm going to refer to my notes here. Overall, I think it's just a lot of misplaced outrage, in kind of misplaced outrage and anger as it relates to slavery overall. I think oftentimes people neglect to understand that, there has been a progression of time since slavery has happened. And I understand that particularly the kingdom of, Dahomey, the tribes that were around, Ghana and, in Nigeria and those areas, you just have to understand that the atmosphere, of that time was about the slave trade. And I think that oftentimes, instead of doing the research to understand what that experience and story and narrative is all about, by actually going to West Africa to visit, to connect with people that know the stories of what happened, matters. And I think that without, vetting those experiences, it's a disservice. And it's emotional. It's an emotional overreaction. To that extent also, I think oftentimes we as descendants of slaves, when we see the reality and the history, particularly of some of the tribes that were a bit more successful and mechanized in the practice of the slave trade, it's just not what I'm trying to say here. It's okay, I'm gonna edit this part out because I kind of forgot what I was gonna say with that part. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. Those tribes that particularly were mechanized and skilled within the practice of capturing of slaves, of being skilled in warfare, therefore had more slaves. Therefore, you see those tribes having more stories of, their success in battle, and ultimately more slaves coming through the transatlantic slave trade to the Caribbeans and into America. I just think that, there are, if people will bother to know the spiritual aspect of a lot of this, there are rituals that are done every year in present day Benin, Dahomey rituals that are specifically aimed at the forgiveness of those slaves that were sent off in the slave trade. Every year that ritual is done. Who's to say that that ritual at some point, if not now, has been accepted? How do you know that those ancestors of us, of our descendants therein, have not somehow accepted that ritual at this point in time? Because let me tell you something else that happens here in America. There are rituals and practices that are specifically aimed and directed at healing ancestral trauma and ancestral spirits that resonate from the slave trade, from your epigenetic trauma. You know, it's real. And so if you culminate and connect with that, you know, you would see situations in films like this not necessarily rousing you up so much emotionally, that you can go back to West Africa and not necessarily be triggered to be around the places and the tribes that were involved in the practice of selling and collecting via warfare your ancestors. Because it's about the transition of time. It's about the lessons and the healings that come therein. But that's overlooked if it's all about the fight. And that brings me to something else that I'm going to kind of lay out now. This fight that kind of exists in terms of the people predominantly protesting this movie, which is mostly, you know, men for the most part. It's a misplaced anger and aggression towards not fighting the enemy that needs to be fought, which is your mind, the way you think, how you see yourself, your reaction to the world around you and the challenges that are around you. And it's about being able to tap into a warrior energy. And that's triggering to see on camera, because women, you know, have embodied that, you know, throughout history, you know, exponentially. And that is a trait, warrior energy, that can get you killed. And so you see a lot of black men throughout generations misplacing that energy, yeah, into situations that they can control, and that they can release that. And I think that fundamentally, in the times that we live in now, it's really a call for men and women to embrace warrior energy where they have it, as they experience challenges in life. To pull on the energy of your ancestors to overcome challenges that come your way. You know, that's what warrior energy truly is all about. And I think that it's depicted wonderfully and beautifully. I think that it's triggering to know and be reminded of female challenges as they relate to, you know, relationships and their dynamics with men. The history of what that looks like, even today. You know, it's challenging to see that on film. Yeah. And the response, of course, has been less than stellar, has been dismal. You know, but women rise to that occasion, and that is what you see called warrior energy. And that is what that looks like from its origins. Now, I get that people are particularly triggered by this particular set of elite warriors, in so much as they were primarily responsible for the overwhelming success in capturing so many slaves that have ended up in the Caribbean, Brazil, and America. And I've heard the traumatizing story there that was left by one particular slave. I forgot his name. But it was telling. It was very powerful. No one's negating the history. This is about the transmutation of those experiences and those ancestors that are still connected to you either way. and how you can use that overwhelming sense of warrior energy towards your experiences. And understand that when you tap into healing, as I'm sure those ancestors have on the other side, clearly, through ritual, through prayer, that you can begin to absorb the bigger lessons, the energy and lessons that are left for you. That's why I thought it was so skillful and artful to focus on a story more so within that experience, yet still draw on the experiences that they had to draw home the point, which is about warrior energy. Let's see, something else I want to say. Women, oh, this is the other part. I think the film depicted this well too. Women embody warrior energy and feminine energy. They embody both. It's expressed through some mediums as high priestess energy, empress energy. Women have the ability to be grounded in their experience and being creative, being productive and fruitful, and they have the ability to tap into higher dimensions. I think it's the same kind of thing on the regular realm that we live in, and the regular experiences of being a woman. Some women naturally lean towards being more under the leadership of a man. And that works depending on the context, on the man, on the righteousness of the man therein. It's very important that women not follow a man and allow him to lead you into what's hell. It's important for you to have the ability to tap into your intuition. But fundamentally, I think women also have a warrior energy. As we had to overcome the experiences of slavery and Jim Crow and civil rights, all of these experiences did not necessarily allow a woman to rest in her feminine energy. So that's why you see stories, obviously of powerful female warrior energy. And it's important. And we would not be here today if our mothers and grandmothers did not have both of those energies primarily, but there were some women who carried warrior energy as needed. And I think that it's dismissive at best to just not acknowledge that and to just go off on protests because it's hashtag fashionable because we haven't done our healing. It's a missed opportunity. The history, of course, is not entirely 100% accurate. It's an opportunity for you to not only go back and research, but to go back and visit and experience and learn about the fullness of the story from where it was then to where they are today. There is something to be said about the long arch of justice. This was a powerful, rich empire. Go take a look at that particular part of West Africa today. You'll understand what I'm saying. So it's about honestly coming together, healing and rebuilding. It's about the opportunity to see the larger narrative and the larger opportunity to grow and to get something more out of it for your life, for your progression, for your healing. That's all I'm saying. This is the other thing I wanted to bring up and bring out about the movie. Let's see. This is more of a esoteric kind of a bird's view per se. Kind of express kind of a lot of the immediate outrage in response to it, and I've already given my 2 cents. But in terms of the overall narrative of people being upset about the fact that it's woman king. No such thing as a woman king. There could not be a king that is a woman is nonsense. Never mind Egypt. Just forget the fact that there were, female pharaohs. Like, I guess that part of history doesn't exist. Never mind the stories of women throughout the history of West Africa that fought against, the influx of European domination. I guess those stories don't exist as well. But irregardless, um, I think again also that's misplaced. Aside from the obvious examples that exist in history of females embodying king energy, even in pop culture today, there's an awesome movie called King of Boys. Side note. Um, Ultimately, like now, kings misunderstand, I think, the power sometimes that they carry and embody. It's a case of the ego knows no bounds. And I think that that's basically what we, or at least if you have a keen eye, is one of the things you observe about kings throughout history. I think across continents, honestly, in cultures, but that's the one observation that I would say that I notice about men that carry king roles and just kings throughout history in general. Um, all they know is the culture, which I guess ultimately is their responsibility. But the thing is, the culture it colors their experiences, and so oftentimes the ego knows no bounds, and that's a weakness that distorts your perception of the world, um, and distorts your perception of your place in the world. Um, One of the things that I thought was interesting about the movie is that, the kings of West Africa at that time did not have the benefit of knowing the larger world around them. They have no concept of how, Europe worked and the legislative process, and how things worked fundamentally. They had no way of really having consistent uh, ability to learn about that because you have to experience directly. There are not many stories. There are no, I don't know of many stories of kings that did a ambassador's mission to England to take a look, to have a conversation with the king himself. You know, these are the kind of things that I think, you know, should keep in mind as you look at history. They had a small perception of what the world was and made all decisions therein based off of that. The king actually thought at that time himself dominant and powerful enough to go against the power of Portugal, of Spain. Some kings thought themselves powerful enough to actually go against the Commonwealth of France. Like, it just speaks to not having a broad view of the world, because all you know is what you know, and your ego won't allow you to know anything else because you're bound by culture. And I think that maybe that's a phenomenon that exists so much in West Africa. That's been my experience. I can't wait to learn more in life. I'll say that when I have opportunity to have more experiences. But so far, that is an observation that I do make. Um, let's see, another point that I would make. So, what was his name? Tariq Nasheed, though I don't put much stock in a man who used to be a former pimp. But anyway, he brought out a point that I thought was important to consider in this discussion. There's a voodoo ritual that they did prior to the slaves getting on the ships to come over before they were sold, called the Tree of Forgetfulness, which they had to walk around, and it would be a ritual so that those slaves would not come back to take back revenge, and haunt them per se for the actions they were doing. That speaks to a level of understanding on some level of, what they were kind of creating. But that's a whole nother conversation. Uh, One of the things that are done in the ritual of I guess forgiveness per se, and the rituals that are done every year, in voodoo rituals that are done every year. I believe that there's a band, like an armband or something that's worn, and uh, it has something to do with calling back the spirit of those descendants of those slaves, and it's like an armband that they wear right here when they do the dancing. So like I don't know. I just think that the rituals that were done on the one side get balanced out and worked out and forgiven on the other. And I think that when you begin to understand the fullness of how that's come 360, I think it might change the perspective overall in looking at it. But that's just a side note. What I will say is the way that West African powerful and elite, I would say, saw other tribes and people were not like me and you, African Americans or African diasporans, necessarily would see each other, because our experience was forever changed and different based off of being transported to a new place and having a new experience and having to come together in a new way. The former divides of tribe and nation no longer existed, and but very much existed there. And I speak from the place of the fact that when I was there, it and when I interacted with people in the culture, it still very much exists today. I think that's the part that's not really understood. There is a lot of tribalism that still exists within West Africa, within certain countries, Ghana, particularly Nigeria. I know that that the tribalism is a real thing, and that can't be negated. And you have to keep that in context, bring it back, all those years. How much more, you know? And those were some brutal times. You don't understand, like, survival in West Africa is a challenge. It's a lot of work. And those, nature is severe. Like, from the things that I've learned, the stories that I've heard, nature is not necessarily your friend. Survival, I don't know if you ever watched, any of those survival, TV shows. I watch a lot of them, but at any rate, you are really calling on everything around you and within you to survive the challenges that come from nature, from the environment, and from other people that see the accumulation of what you're able to negotiate from your hard work. They will come in and want to steal and pillage and destroy. And that was a story of many villages and tribes throughout, just tribal warfare overall. It didn't help. And I think that was exploited, ultimately. And that's why you see, and at least during that time, that was a key factor. And what really amped up so much of the bloodlust for war, and the motivation was really a tribal or deep tribal resentments. So that's, it's really deep. It's something to keep in mind. And their local histories and local stories that you'd have to really get in to understand. I'll say that. Let me see. I'll say this too. It's still like that to an extent in West Africa. So therefore, it is still like that also here in America. It is still like that everywhere in the world, because what I'm saying is that survival is brutal. It's not easy. Um, and so I think that you have to have a sober perspective in looking at the movie and trying to get yourself into understanding the mindset, if it even possible, in looking at the film. So I just want to point that out there. Let's see. Talked about that. Let's see. I'll say this is the other part I want to make too. Not very popular opinion. I might get shot down for this, but it's okay. In my experience, when I was there, in my experience overall in some future videos that I'll make, nothing much is changed in terms of the motivation fundamentally that exists within West Africa, which is power and money, power and domination, power, wealth, have always been, Charlie, always been the motivation, and still are primary, motivations in most every decision and move that is made with many men, especially in leadership, within countries. So those same spirits and influences of greed never went anywhere. And it's still present today. So I think that has to be kept in mind in terms of being sober-minded about where you come from. This is something I understand too. People have so much frustration in understanding the black community, and why does the black man act like this, and why is the black woman like this? If you go back and look at how the motivations are of the people that you come from, you would understand plenty. Like the most simplest example, I think that we tend to overlook, and I myself am trying to make sense of it. This challenge that we experience as black women, in this whole notion of monogamy and men's ability to stay focused on one woman. They get that honest because that is the same thing that just about every West African man also has challenges with. And I just think that it's something to be explored for a later date for sure. But that's just an example of like epigenetic things that travel, that exist. Is it good or bad? Who knows? But it's about understanding the origins and understanding the why of things, and then from there making a decision based off of what is a higher, better, move for you based off of your life and your current circumstance. But that's just my kind of perspective on that. Let's see. The only other point that I would make in terms of the movie and the whole contention about slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, I don't even know per se if I have the quote unquote authority to speak on this. So I won't say much. But when I was starting out in terms of learning about, African spirituality and, what is my place in it? What does it mean? What are the lessons for me? What is it that God would have me learn fundamentally for the experiences that I'm having right now? And my godmother at the time, Yeye Olashun, I will always honor and respect that she is my godmother. So, but anyway, she is a wealth powerhouse of knowledge and information. And she told me the story of an Odu, per se. I don't think it's one that's necessarily called out or anything or something like that, but it's a story of the mothers, and in the mother's wisdom, kind of an oracle kind of wisdom the story is given of how the white man, like the very, 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 very first white man's appearance on the shores of West Africa, divination was done about this first occurrence. And I believe it goes something to the effect of, uh, man was the man, kings, leadership, chiefs were warned about the outcome of their interaction and trade with this new white man that has come upon the shores. They were forewarned of it. But also within that same breath, the divinations were done as well to the effect of the amount of wealth and power that can come from interacting and trading with these new men would be beyond what your has ever been known, or something to that effect. And so it was through the decision based off of power and ego and pride over the ability to have power and domination over neighboring tribes that made the king's chiefs at the time override that wisdom, that sacred wisdom, to still engage in trade, fundamentally leading to the slave trade. And so that's the story. And so I just think it's really interesting that the whole slave trade kind of began based off of a lot of the same impulses that I had expressed earlier. And so I think that is something that should be kind of looked at. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm sure I've butchered that in some way. But fundamentally, I think I'm getting at the gist of it. I think the larger question is, how much is that still happening today? You know, how much are larger opportunities for growth being, overlooked or bypassed because of the pursuit of power, wealth, and domination, for leaderships in countries, for you and your local everyday experiences and choices that you make, because I'll leave it there. There's stories for other days. Spiritually, it gets deep. All I'll say is that West Africa is a deep place. Your ancestors are really deep. There've always been spiritual powers that will support you in your wealth, but that can look good or bad. It's neutral. And I will leave it there because that truly is another video and another story for another day. Anyway, I hope that I've given a broad overview of my response to this movie, to the history, to what it means, to the boycott. And again, those are my thoughts. I would love to open up the conversation and hear your thoughts in response to all that I've shared. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll talk to you later.